Hey everybody, welcome to the Bass Shed Podcast. My name's Ryan Roberts. Alright, today on the show I'm talking to Dan Seeff. Dan Seeff is a multi-instrumentalist, producer, songwriter, radio host. He's an administrator for what was formerly known as the Thelonious Monk Institute, and now it's the Herbie Hancock Institute. He'll talk about some of that. He'll also talk about what it was like studying with Ron Carter. He used to go out to New York, I think pretty frequently. Not super frequently because he lives in L.A., so he can't get back there all the time, but he would go regularity. He would go with regularity. That's a better way of saying it. To study with Ron Carter, and he talks about some of the musical lessons that Ron Carter would lessons and exercises that Ron Carter would have him go through, and I was really interested in that. He's covering a lot of ground and up to a lot of things. He hosts a radio show. It's on KJazz here in the LA area. It's out of Long Beach. KJazz 88.1 if you're in the Los Angeles area on Thursday nights. And he talks about the correlation between hip-hop and jazz, which is another topic I'm really, really fascinated in. Fascinated by. It's another topic I'm really fascinated by. Here's my talk with Dan Seeff.
Traffic.
Check levels. Check 1, 2.
Testing.
Oh, this is looking all right. Check. All right. Yeah, man. I'll let you steer the ship. Where do you want to start? You're doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Should I just talk about the different things I'm doing?
Yeah, let's just talk.
But did you want to talk about that, or do you want to talk about bass and records? Or you
we can do any of all that. Like I'm bummed that we can't play.
But my question is, can we play clips under a certain length? That's what I wonder about. Is it possible to play 10-second clips?
I don't know.
That's what, because some companies that have rules about that, they will allow short segments.
Who are the companies?
I think like YouTube. You can do it on YouTube. You can play a clip on YouTube, but you can't play the whole song.
How do they get away with that? Like people covering stuff? I
don't
know.
know. Covering you can do, but playing recorded material you can't.
Okay.
But you can if it's of a certain length and if it's educational, apparently. But I don't know how you get qualified.
Well, if we talk about if we analyze it, then it's educational.
That's what I think.
And isn't that kind of subjective? Like
it is.
If someone didn't
someone's job is to decide whether or not what you're doing is educational.
Right.
But I don't know what criteria that person's using. I don't know.
I don't know what records we think.
I don't know. I mean, the two things
what
that
do you listen to? Let's start there. Like you do the radio show, hip hop and jazz.
Yeah. Are you recording now?
Yeah.
Oh, you are. Okay.
I mean, maybe this will make it. Maybe it won't.
Okay,
I don't know.
Okay. Well, the records that I was going to mention for bass, because it's a bass podcast, right?
It's musicians and me talking.
Okay.
That's all
Okay.
it is.
Okay.
Sometimes it's bass and where they went to school.
Okay.
And then sometimes it's me and Sam Barsh
talking about
talking about whatever.
Okay. So For Once in My Life by Stevie Wonder with Jamerson. Yeah. So
that's in my Jamerson course that I'm releasing on the website.
Oh wow.
So I did. I just finished. So it's 4 songs, and I break down his whole thing.
Yeah.
It's the same old song by the Four Tops.
Oh yeah.
Bernadette.
Yep.
What's Going On, of course.
Yeah.
And then For Once in My Life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For Once in My Life I think that's my favorite.
That's definitely they're tiered in order of how gnarly they are. And For Once in My Life is gnarly, and the harmony in it's gnarly.
Yeah.
They get progressively more advanced.
Changes key, and there's that cool turnaround at the end.
Yeah, that they just loop.
Yeah.
Amazing line.
Yeah.
What about the tune do you like? I mean,
the tune's incredible, but his I think I learned the whole thing. I definitely still could play and remember the very first 8 measures. The doon doon, the doon, the diddle doon doon, do 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 do. That's just the best. Yeah, and it's EQ'd or it's panned so that you can pan it to one side and you get one of the channels is like all Jamerson and percussion. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I could listen to that with barely hear the rest of the song.
Have you checked out all those YouTubes, like just kind of the board mix where it's just his bass line?
No, I need to do that, though.
Those are happening. I got hip to those like maybe I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
And what's going on was the first.
Yeah, I've heard what's going on.
And
You can find all of what's going on. Engineers and producers have it.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And you hear, like, even transcribing it, you hear all the subtlety.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's intense.
Yeah, it's like his tone and I don't know, just, same stuff you love about it, I'm sure. It's just like what he does when and how it makes things move forward at certain spots, and then he'll kind of not, like he'll hang on a note for another length of time. But it's also just amazing that apparently, from what I understand, he just had chord charts. You know what I mean?
See, I haven't read on that. I haven't read about what he...
That's what I think, because there's actually a book of Jamerson transcriptions.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's got each transcription is accompanied by a little written segment by different bass players, so like Pino Palladino and Patitucci and Anthony Jackson, and in there are some pictures of some of the chord charts of some of the Motown sessions, and they're just chord charts like we would get on a jazz gig. Yeah, so like that he would look at that and be like, okay, cool, dun, dun, and do all that is crazy.
Well, I mean, rhythmically, he got so much information from the melody,
right?
And like, which is underutilized.
Yes, totally.
From bass players, I hear.
But also, I feel like for whatever weird reason that world that they were in lent itself to what he was doing somehow. And if you tried to put that in places now, I mean, someone could. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I feel like the format was a great melody, simple chord progression. Everybody else is playing something pretty static. The drums playing repeated pattern.
I really think they all just let him, like all the Funk Brothers agreed, like
let this guy go.
Just let him go because that's the formula.
Yes.
The formula is him doing all that.
Yep.
And we just stay out of his way.
Right, exactly. And in that way, it reminds me, it's different, but reminds me of my all-time favorite, Aston Barrett from the Wailers, where the interesting thing happening in the music, if you just get away from just loving it, enjoying it, and the feeling it gives you, is that Bob Marley singing a melody, and then there's a counter melody on the bottom,
right?
And everything else is static, same as the Motown thing.
Yeah.
Like everything else is going ching, ching. The drums are going, tss, 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 everything else stays pretty much the same. But this other guy's doing this melodic thing. It's not improvised like Jamerson,
right?
And it's not. You can't listen to a whole song and have all this variation the way it does.
Yeah.
But in terms of it being like there's a melody and then there's this other great low line happening, like a 2-voice thing.
Sure.
That it's similar in that way. The funny thing, I think it's in that book. If it's not, it was in something else I saw, is that as much as we may love him and he's like lauded as this, historical figure, some of the people in those days weren't into what he was doing. And there's some story of someone on the Motown label that came to the session where they would track the music and was like, I know that stuff you do. Don't be doing any of that behind my song.
Oh, it was an artist.
That was like, don't. I've heard all that crazy stuff. You don't do that.
So what
when I'm
do?
singing.
Did they get Bob Babbitt?
No, he had to tone down what he was doing.
Okay.
And there are some of those records where he plays it pretty straight. And I wonder if it's because a producer or someone in the band was like, cool it on this.
I think, like, so much of that. Because then when Motown moved out here, and he was doing sessions out here.
Yeah.
It wasn't the same.
No.
It wasn't the same thing, so I feel like to keep the money coming in, he just played the game.
That's right. Well, it was a job.
Right, like any of us would.
Yes, exactly. What's he going to do?
And I think,
lose the job so he can play more notes?
Right, exactly. And I remember reading what he was getting paid back in those days. It was pretty...
It was good?
Once they settled the thing for him getting credit for it, he was making like ridiculous money for the time period.
Good. That's good to hear.
Which is good.
Because we hear stories about all these people who are incredible that were broke and
right.
You know what I mean? It's like that's great that he was compensated fairly.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever it was, it couldn't be equivalent with his importance in the history of bass. You know what
absolutely.
I mean? Because how would you even monetize
and all
that?
the time and woes it took to get to that.
Yeah.
For him to go from getting his first bass to James Jamerson.
Yeah. Right.
The gig never pays enough.
Right.
When you think about all that.
Yeah, of course. So for once in my life, the other thing that I learned start to finish and can still probably do most of the way through now is Rock With You.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the bass player from Rufus, Bobby Watson, not Bobby Watson, the sax player.
Okay.
Bobby Watson, the bass player.
Right.
And
I never knew that, actually.
That's just from looking in liner notes, because the rest of it is, I think, or a lot of the rest of it is either keyboard bass or the Brothers Johnson guy, whichever guy played bass. And that, again, you can get, I know a lot of people that have the stems of that have individual tracks of that, and I have just the bass. I don't have the whole thing yet, but I do have the bass.
Oh, nice.
And I was actually, so I learned it, and again, I'm playing it, and I'm like, how did someone just come in and do this? This is just so
what information did he get?
Again, I don't know, except that maybe maybe chord chart. I don't know if that guy reads or if it's by ear, or maybe it was like 50,000 passes and then they comped. Who knows?
But it was Quincy.
It was Quincy,
and
right?
Quincy's got an ear for orchestration, clearly, and arrangements, and specifically the bass.
Right. So I would love to know what he was told.
What direction?
Yeah, what direction did he get? Did he have direction? Did he just have to listen to it? But the thing that was interesting was that after learning it and then years later getting the bass track only, is that it's much sloppier than I thought it was. Because part of when I was playing, I was like, God, how did this guy get it so clean? I don't hear any fret noise. I don't hear any, and everything's nailed. And it's sloppier. It's not. I mean, I love it still. It's not to take anything away from that guy or that track.
Is this the track that made the record?
It's the track that made the record.
Before edit?
No, it's the track that made the record. So it's not that it's even sloppy. It's just that it's human,
Yeah, it's looser.
And when I listened to it, I was like, this is so beyond anything we're capable of. But then I heard it, and I'm like, oh no, this is like really, really great bass playing. But it's like I can hear where there's like some slop, the rhythm's not as exact as I thought it was on the record.
Sure.
But it's put together on the record in a way that you don't hear any of that.
It's fascinating. What year was Rock With You?
Is it 70 something or is it 80? I'll look it up. It's either 80.
Off the Wall was late 70s.
Yeah, that's from Off the Wall.
It's Off the Wall.
Yeah,
it's 78.
I think 78. Let's look. But
there's a.
That's my favorite of any recorded. 79.
79.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just a thing, man. I think there was more latitude there to get away with it.
For sure. Well, I have a theory about that, which is that everybody. So Quincy came from being in jazz. I also love Pink Floyd and Yes and Bob Marley. All those people were influenced by jazz.
Yeah.
So, and you can interviews and people talking about stuff. The keyboard, Rick Wright from Pink Floyd talks about how one of the turnarounds in Breathe is the B section of All Blues.
Okay.
A voicing that he uses. It's like a E flat 7 sharp 9 or whatever it is, altered chord. And the guitar player from Yes loved Barney Kessel and all. So that generation grew up bowing down to jazz and playing jazz. And then the next generation grew up bowing down to those guys and so on. As you get further away, the latitude for interesting playing and the interest in interesting playing and the harmonic stuff all starts to kind of just flatten out. That's what I think. That's my theory. Is that there's this big explosion, and then from that explosion, the influence goes into all these other genres of music, and then each generation it fades. You know what I mean? And whatever.
But now, where do you think we're at with that now? Because of the jazz hip hop thing that's happening with Kendrick and Kamasi.
Right.
I mean, even Glasper from a few years ago, and all that.
I don't know. There's something's happening. I mean, now I'm hearing like interesting R&B. I don't even know if you'd call it R&B, but sort of like soul stuff that has more interesting chords. But because we're so far from the period of putting lots of value in facility on your instrument or study of harmony, all that stuff, I'll hear things that I'm like, this guy's trying to do something, but he doesn't really have a ton of grounding in whatever it is he's trying to do. Like he's just
in like a pop world.
Yeah, okay. Like I don't want to trash somebody, but things I've heard where I'm like, wow, I can tell this guy is like trying to get away from the ordinary chord progression, but he doesn't have anything.
Doesn't know his options.
No, not really. Even like a basic theory class would help do a better job. So I don't know. It's an interesting, but that also I feel like that happens because these are all my ridiculous theories. Who knows if they hold me water,
but it's fascinating because you're in both worlds.
Yeah, I am in both worlds. I'm in both worlds. That hip hop came from people that didn't have any resources, so they just did what they had with what they had. So if you had a turntable and you could play the favorite 4 bars of the record and talk over it, then that's what you did. So it came from just like making the most of what you had without there being too much of an educational backdrop to it.
But it's not too. Is dissimilar a word?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a word. Then like the roots of jazz in New Orleans.
That's true, yeah, of self-taught
I really like the idea of that connection between
Right.
Storyville and the Bronx.
Yes,
you know,
that's
like,
true.
I
haven't
really
thought about
think
that. That's really good.
I really think they're coming from the same place.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's like the people's music.
Yeah.
But the thing is that opened the door for music making that you just kind of teach yourself without any kind of grounding. So then you get to where we are now, and you have waves of people that don't have a ton of information but are able to make cool music with what they know how to do. So, you know, where I know Quincy studied with this famous composer whose name I'm forgetting.
Right, the one in France.
Yes, exactly. A woman. I can't remember her name, though.
I watched the doc like twice, and I
I still need to see it.
Oh, really? You haven't
but I
checked
know
it out?
about it because I know because I read his biography a long time ago.
There's a brilliant one on Sam Cooke, too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to check
It
that
was
out.
really
I don't know that
I
much
nerd
about
out
him.
on, like, documentaries.
Me too,
and
but
true crime.
I know. And what about True Detective?
No.
That's a great show.
Really?
Yeah, me too. But I just know like specific. Like I know the Pink Floyd ones. I know there's a Steely Dan one, Making of Asia.
Okay.
Steely Dan. Okay, here's another bass. Just to veer off into another thing, is the bass line from Peg.
Okay.
I know that bass line really well, and I love that bass line because it's fingers in the verses and slapping in the choruses. I'm not really that into slapping, but he does. It's Chuck Rainey.
Yeah.
And it's really, for slapping, it's the best to me because it's pretty understated and you can't really even tell it's slapping. And the tone is sort of mute. It's not that bright tone that got associated with slapping. It's kind of a more muted sound, and it works so well with what the drums are doing. And in that documentary, there's a minute where Donald Fagen and Walter Becker are muting stuff out, and you can just hear the bass and the drum.
Oh, really?
Again, like that, like the Rock With You, and I heard that, I was like, ooh. And I just rewound that like 50 times.
Yeah.
Then I was like noticing that maybe I didn't quite learn it right. Because it's hard to hear because you can't hear sometimes the difference between his pulls and where the snare is.
Okay.
There's some stuff that can just get hard to kind of decipher. But that's another one that I love. But so it's just an interesting thing that a lot of major popular music, you know, as opposed to something like a Michael Jackson album that Quincy Jones, was probably more educated in a lot of ways than a lot of the people working on that record. But he's at the helm.
Yeah.
But that's probably not a common thing anymore. You know, for the person in the like executive chair to have more musical, you know, like he could have done a big band score the same night that he recorded Thriller, you know, and nobody else in there probably could have done
especially
that.
like that level of education.
Yes.
It's not just like, oh, you know, he's going to community college.
Right.
You know, like it's Quincy Jones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's this drummer named Freddie Gruber who lived out here that I don't know a ton about him, but I know that Dave Weckl studied with him, and I can't remember all the other people who studied with him. I think Vinnie Caliuta maybe, but he's a guy that was known more for being this guy that kind of helped get people's technique together. And he had played briefly with Charlie Parker, but never recorded with him.
Okay.
But I talked to him one time because I was hiring
when
him.
Parker was out here?
Yes, I think so. Because
Okay.
I think he was out. I think he was only ever out here. I think. But I talked to him because we were going to hire him to do something for the Monk Institute. This is a long time ago, actually, to teach our drummer at the time. And I never did make it happen, but when I would call him, he'd keep me on the phone for about 20 minutes, like telling me crazy stories and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Weird, you know, it was funny because it was just so different. But, you know, like the guy that I wanted him to teach was Hungarian. And when I called him, I said, tell me about this guy you want me to teach. And I said, well, he's from Hungary. Hungarians are funny because they're always running from someone. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, check your history. They're always running. And I was like, okay. Like just wacky stuff that like just he's coming from a whole different world. But fascinating because I'm like, what is this guy talking about? But he
Is he still around?
No, I think he passed away probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And the last time I saw him, he came to something that Terry Lynn Carrington was playing at, and he somehow found my number and called me. He saw that I was there and going, I want you to give a message to Terry Lynn Carrington. The way she was soloing, it was actually a cool conversation. He was like, the way she was soloing that's how you do it. It's about life. You know, it's not perfect. It's just, it's imperfect, but it's the feeling, you know, like he just went, you know.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then I called her and was like, hey, and she knew who he was and was like, wow, that's a great compliment coming from him. But he was talking and he was like, he said, you know, it was like a everything's terrible kind of conversation in music.
Is he just kind of a dark, jaded guy? Like,
yeah, just grumpy.
He never turned out to be more than
I don't even know if it was based
on
on that. It was just like, well, everything sucks today kind of thing.
Oh.
But I didn't get like, I should be bigger. It was just kind of like, blah.
Yeah.
everything's terrible. And you know, I think it probably started from him being like, I'm glad this guy wants to learn how to play the drums, and then on into like, because no one cares, and blah, blah, blah. And then he was like, he goes, you know, jazz, you know, it was just understood that jazz musicians were the best musicians until Woodstock. And then Woodstock opened the door for the guy that used to sit at the table while jazz musician played and bang on his glass with a fork. All of a sudden, he could now be on stage and everyone could clap for him. And I thought that was pretty...
That's a fascinating idea.
Yes. Well, then I after we got off the phone, I was like, a lot of the music I like probably comes from that Woodstock period in some way, whether it's Hendrix or all that all the things I like from England and the 70s rock stemmed, or the door was opened by that era, that 60s like hippie era stuff. But I was like, that's interesting from his perspective. Those guys are just kind of sad musicians, you know what I mean?
Right.
In the same way that to some people that were considered sad musicians by him, they think hip-hop people are sad. You know what I mean? Or what about the Quincy article where he said the Beatles were sad? Did you see that?
I've heard about that multiple times because I've been transcribing a bunch of Beatles lately too.
Yeah. Well, see, that if
now,
it was so sad, why would it be worthy of transcription? You know that,
right? Well, I've had over the years I've taught it a lot.
Yeah.
You know, just people wanting to learn the bass lines, and I think Paul McCartney lines are absolutely important.
Yes.
Because
Agreed.
Let's take like Obladi for instance, right? The bass line's super simple.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very beginner.
Boom, ding, ding,
yeah.
Ding, ding. Yeah. Okay.
But that triad gives the whole thing this whimsical bounce.
Yes, totally.
And once you understand that,
that's right.
The meaning of why he played that,
right?
Then it's genius.
Yes. So I read that article, and at first I was like, "Oh my God, what is he saying?" But I also, and I tried to think, why would he have that point of view? So all I could come up with was a couple things. One, I know that for the '60s jazz musicians up until '64, jazz was really had like a strong following in this country, and it was considered the thing. And then when the Beatles came, it was like the whole country's head turned a different. Right. So the first thing is kind of like they made us obsolete. I'm sure there's like anger about that. And because of the fact that it went from an interest in something that did require high-level musicianship to something that didn't require as high, also probably felt like, why would you be interested in that when we can do all this stuff and they clearly can't? You know what I mean? Then the other thing is that some people I know in jazz, that's their attitude towards the Beatles, because what they know is I want to hold your hand, help, and that first wave of stuff that was not as interesting as the White Album and they'd stop listening after that. But they were just like, it's garbage, and it's taking attention away from us, and we don't like it. That's it. And they don't know that other stuff and didn't take an interest in it. So in their minds, the Beatles are like in sync, or they're like a boy band that stole people's attention for something that was good.
Right.
So maybe that's part of what it is. But then also in the article, he talks about doing a session with Ringo where Ringo couldn't get a fill and they had to hire someone else. But
that's not surprising.
It's not surprising, but it wasn't that those, you know, that's not what's important about that. It's not that they had like that type of like walk in and do a session perfectly musicianship.
No,
it was
those,
if you gave some other session musicians the same resources of them, would they have come up with something that everyone on planet Earth
those
knows
records
and
are sloppy.
They're sloppy,
but they're singing out of tune.
Yeah,
you know, like.
But the impact they had, you can't deny that. And
they didn't steal anything. America gave them the attention.
Right, that's right.
You know?
Yeah, of course. When you're on the receiving end of having the attention taken
like
away
you
from
can't
you,
you can't be pissed at the Beatles.
I mean, I'm saying this, and I'm.
I mean, I'm not coming at you, obviously.
No. But I also want to say I'm putting through my filter things I've heard other people say. And I could be assuming some of these things, but that's the sense I get. When I read the Quincy thing, I was just trying to get where he was coming from. Paul McCartney is the saddest bass player ever. And you know, because I know he loved the Brothers Johnson. Maybe that's it's like his value system wouldn't really classify Paul McCartney as something that he would think is cool.
Right.
I get that.
Yeah,
but at the same time, like that's very like that's like a foundation. You know,
it's fantastic.
You can't deny it. So,
right, exactly.
But I get his. You know, I bow to his million years of music, whatever, and he's got his point of view on it. But I don't. What I'm saying, I guess, is that I don't read that and think like, well, he's right. I'm going to stop listening to Paul McCartney. It's like I know what I like and I know what I think is important.
And what's fascinating to me about the Quincy thing is, you would think you get. No, it's not even you would think you get. How would I say it? Cats at the top, like, they don't have anything to prove.
Right.
Everybody knows who Quincy is.
Right.
McCartney doesn't have anything to prove.
Right.
McCartney.
Well,
knows
he
who
was just
is.
giving his opinion. You know what I mean?
But you would think. I think why I find it fascinating is you would think Quincy would be like, man, yeah, cool.
Right.
Some people dug that too.
Right.
I mean, the people that bought the album still bought Michael Jackson.
Right. Of course.
They're into pop music.
Yeah, but he just lets it rip when people ask him.
I've heard about it.
Yeah,
I haven't read it yet.
And doesn't filter, which is fun for us because here we are talking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is fascinating to think like, why does that guy with his background have that point of view? And I'm giving my theory. I could be completely wrong about all of it, but it is just interesting.
Sure,
it's interesting, and I also wonder if, in a different context, he would say something different. If he might be like, "Oh, those guys were great. The Beatles made great music," or who knows? You know what I mean? Like on a Thursday, he might say something because I've noticed that with Miles Davis. People will be like, "Miles Davis said this," and it's like, so meaning that's the final word on it. And then you see an interview from like 2 months later, and he's like, "Nah, that guy's cool. I like him." Yeah. Like there's some story that he didn't like Hank Mobley or whatever. Or it's in his book that he was like
Hank or George Coleman. I remember
supposedly. There's something there too, I guess, but. Yeah. With the Hank Mobley thing, I think in his book he says after Coltrane left, he's like, I hired Hank Mobley before George Coleman. Okay. And he said, and he just didn't do anything for me. Yeah. So people will say, oh, yeah, Miles Davis thinks Hank Mobley isn't any good or blah, 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 blah. But then Dave Liebman, who played with Miles in the 70s and also knew that story, told me that he said to Miles one time, hey, Miles, Hank Mobley, just to see what his response was. And Miles said, a singer of songs. Okay. Which is like, he could play beautifully melodic music or whatever it was, which wasn't like, I don't like him. You know what I mean? Sure. So
you kind of, I don't know. I mean,
you can't take. It's interesting to hear what people like that have to say, but you can't take it as the final. Word on it.
They have bad days too.
Yes, they have bad days too. But I'm saying that because I used to when I was younger. I'd be like, oh, he doesn't like this. That means it's bad.
Yeah.
Or he thinks this is good. So I don't. It's good if someone says they think something's good that you don't like, because then it forces you to have to re-examine it, and you might find something in it. But
sure,
I'm glad that I'm out of the phase of thinking that if someone like that says something is bad, that I got to go along with it because they're the expert and I don't know. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, all that matters is the effect it has on you.
Yeah.
If you love it, it makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Then for you, it's good.
And I think when you're coming up, I know at least for me, like, it was a puzzle. Music was this puzzle that I had to figure out. And I had to, okay, I got to like this guy and I got to do this. And, there's only one shot. Yeah. I have to find the one path between here and...
Right. Some of that's not bad. Because you got to get... I do think you have to get focused. Yeah. You know what I mean? If you... people that I know that were, like, super jazz snobby and hated everything else... That's not bad for a period. I think that's okay to do for a period because it gets you really hyper-focused on one thing. Sure. You can get good at that thing. And then later, if you realize that attitude isn't for you, then you can absorb other things. And, it's like, look at Sam. Sam was like super jazz snob. Yeah. And that served him, I think. Right. Had he been like, let me do this, let me do that, maybe he wouldn't have gotten to be as good as he is as a piano player now. Right. So good that he went through that. But also good that he stop thinking that way now.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's the I mean, I don't know. You can probably talk to this about yourself. Like, it's in you to obsess about something.
Sure, of course. I think for all musicians.
Yeah, and
that's good, I think, also.
And
if you want to get anything done, you got to be obsessed.
But when we're just starting out, we don't know how to focus that yet.
That's right.
And so, like, I started really getting into jazz. I mean, the first record I ever bought was Stanley Clarke's first record.
Oh, interesting.
And that was like before I heard Ray Brown, before I heard Jocko, before I heard
playing electric or playing upright.
He does both on that record.
Oh, interesting.
And sings actually.
Oh wow. I didn't know that.
And so like that was the record. Like that was the record I'd listen to every day, and I didn't understand any of it. Like I was like 15 I was 15. And, like, I'm listening to, I think it was 1974 or 76, the record was out, and it's fusion-y and all, you know. I have no idea what I'm listening to, but I should like this.
But you wanted to.
Yeah, I want to like this because I want to be great at doing this thing.
Right.
So I have to figure out how to make myself like this.
Yeah. I think that's good. I
just kept doing that for years.
Because if you don't do that, you just get the surface. You don't get beyond the surface.
Right.
I did that too. I remember the person I did that with randomly was Alan Holdsworth.
Okay.
Someone was like, "You got to get into this," and I was like, "What is this?" The first time I was like, But I was like, well, I'll just put it on like 50,000 times. You know, probably what you did with the Stanley. You know, you just listen over it, and then some of it starts to like become clear.
Right.
And I'm glad because I love that I got into that, and I still like it now when I listen to it. There's a couple some of the chord stuff is cool. I can't play anything like that on guitar, but I'm amazed by the guitar playing. You know.
Yeah. Well, he's his own institution.
Totally. But yeah, I think it's good. I think that route is good and natural. But of course, when you encounter people that are deep in that, it can be rough to try to talk to them.
Yeah, because they have. I remember
have blinders on that they've put. But that's their. It's like developmental. Like it's like a little kid, you know.
And sometimes there's just that because there's, like there's R&B guys I know, and maybe you can speak to this as well because you have a foot in both camps.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I'm not R&B enough for the R&B guys,
right,
and I'm not jazzy enough for the jazz guys.
Right, of course.
And I'm just like in this middle land.
Yeah.
But I'm all the time in the back of my mind. It's like, man, but you need to check out like this jazz record.
Right.
To the R&B guys.
Sure.
And then like, what? You don't know who Joss Stone is? How is that possible?
Right. Well, I guess like on a normal day, I could be at the now the Herbie Hancock Institute, formerly.
When did that change happen?
January 1st
of this year.
Okay. Yeah, just now after 30 years.
So he just put his name on it, or he runs the whole thing?
No, what happened was Thelonious, the Monk estate wanted to take the name back to do something else with, which I don't know specifically what, but the name, the Monk estate took the name back, and then Herbie was approached by the institute. He was already the chairman, but
I remember
he didn't know. I don't think he was expecting that to be something that was offered to him or asked of him. And he took some time to think about it and said yes. And so, it's I think pretty unusual to have an organization named after a living person. It's the common thing is to have it after someone who's passed away.
Sure.
So I think
but the Monk people specifically chose Herbie because he was already the chairman?
No, they weren't involved in that piece of it. They just wanted the name back, and that was
that was
kind of the end of that. So, it hasn't changed anything yet, but I think the interesting thing from my perspective, having been there since 95 or whatever, it's 95, is that we've, in my mind, drifted into doing things that I think are pretty representative of Herbie anyway.
Yeah. So it's got his fingerprint on it.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because I've been parts of things that people have said, well, what does that have to do with Thelonious Monk? And I can't really answer that question, but I'd always thought, well, that's the name, and he represents creativity, so that whatever you do is kind of can qualify. But for instance, there's a program that I run. It is now in a much more reduced version than it used to be, but called BeBop to Hip Hop, where we go into these LAUSD high schools and bring in hip hop artists and jazz musicians. And it used to be a year-round, like everyday thing for about 2 or 3 years. And that was one that people are, what does hip hop have to do with Thelonious Monk? No one's going to ask that with Herbie's name on it.
Right.
He did Rocket. That was a huge thing for breakdancing. And
yeah.
all these scratch DJs talk about seeing that performance on TV on the Grammys and that being the first thing that made them want to DJ.
Tribe covered Cantaloupe Island.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, that was Us 3.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Us 3.
Dilla
might have done something. If you go on, so, now that I have this radio show, this hip-hop and jazz radio show, I spent a lot of time on whosampled.com. Do you know Who Sampled?
No.
Who Sampled is great. So you just go on there and you put in you can go either direction. You can put in Tribe Called Quest and it'll list all their albums and all the samples on each song.
Oh, word.
Or you can put in Herbie Hancock and it'll list everyone that sampled him.
Okay.
And it was when I first started the show, that was like my first thing, was spending an afternoon on Who Sampled and just like digging around and being surprised to find, like, you put in Coltrane, it's like 8 samples. I'm like, okay, interesting. Put in Herbie, 580 samples. Yeah. And I'm like, oh. But then it makes sense because he's got all these electric records, and sonically it's a lot more diverse than Coltrane's records. Sonically basically sound the same from the beginning to the end, but for the most part. Yeah, like when I did that digging, I was surprised to find how few of the acoustic jazz people get sampled.
Okay.
Just because I just don't think it's sonically diverse or whatever it is. It's like, anyone, like Ahmad Jamal, I was interested to learn, has a whole 70s period I didn't know that much about.
Really?
Yes, where he's playing Rhodes.
Really?
And doing a lot of interesting sonic stuff, and that stuff's sampled all the time.
Interesting.
Poinciana is sampled once, and I think one other 60s or 50s thing is sampled once, but mostly people like the mix of acoustic and electric stuff.
Uh-huh.
And so that's interesting. But what we got into that from something else. We were talking about
Where were we?
I don't remember.
Monk, Herbie.
Monk and Herbie. You were asking about the name. I can't remember now. But anyway, I was before that. I was saying basically that I think the things that we're doing now at the Hancock Institute are fitting of Herbie, and but it had become that before the.
Did you go? Did you go there when it was the Monk? Did you go through the educational?
As a student?
Yeah.
No, never.
Okay.
I've always just only been an administrator. But it's been an interesting experience because I've done all these different things and came into it as a musician, but came into it not as a jazz musician. Came into it as a guy that was playing guitar and doing just some rock and reggae and just other random stuff. But I loved jazz.
Was guitar your first instrument?
Well, yeah. Well, the first instrument was piano.
Okay.
Then sax. Then guitar. Then bass, and then upright bass very late. Like I was 30 when I started studying upright bass, yeah. And I just got determined that I was going to learn that and be able to do it to the point where I
you have to.
Actually,
like that's the only way. You have to have tunnel vision.
Yeah, and that's what I did with that. And I'm glad I did. And it was people that I was around at the time. Many were supportive, but some people were like, why are you suddenly deciding to put all your time into this random thing? But I just, for whatever reason, I felt like it was something I had to do. And then also, by virtue of working at the Institute, I had become somewhat friendly with Ron Carter, who was like, yeah, if you want to take lessons, which I was like, I'm not qualified to take lessons. But I knew somebody else that knew him that I worked with at the Institute, and he said, he'll take you. All he wants to see is that you're serious. He doesn't care about the level. He just wants to see that you're serious. And he gave me some pointers on what to do and not to do in the lessons, which were helpful because Ron's pretty...
He's calculated.
It's not that he's calculated. It's that he's... You got to be careful what you do around him. He wants a certain level of presentation, and you got to be careful. Like he got upset one time when I brought a tuner. I respect his point of view, and I'm grateful that he's willing to show me anything. So whatever it is he wants me to do, I'm happy to do. But
now what do you think you took from those lessons that you couldn't have got from a record?
A lot of different stuff. First of all, I understand his playing a lot better, and I understand his, you could, if you got 10 of the really big jazz bass players together in a room and dug to try to figure out what they saw as their purpose in the band, they'd all probably have slightly different aims, you know what I mean? And Ron's aim is to play a line that relates to the music that's going on that will drive the band into a different direction. Yeah. That's his aim. And that might not be the aim of some of the other great people that we know and love. Some other people might feel like I got this bass function and I do what's expected of the bass or whatever it is, or my thing is my sound, or Charlie Hayden might have a different sort of goal in mind, but Ron's
he's not as investigative.
No, not in that. I feel like with him it's just feeling and soul or something like that. Yeah, it's like he's trying to transmit this.
There's this kind of, with Charlie.
Yeah, with Charlie.
Yeah, there's definitely this kind of organic.
Yes.
Like even in structured, like I did a transcription for him on the website. One of my all-time favorite recorded bass solos.
What is it?
This song is called "The Cost of Living."
Yeah.
Okay.
From Michael Brecker, first record.
Absolutely.
That was the first bass solo, upright bass solo that I could understand.
That was the first one that made me didn't bore me.
Yes.
And I was young. I was like 16 or 17. Right. And I remember talking to Patitucci about it, and I'm like, man, I transcribed this one child. He's like, "The Cost of Living."
Yeah,
I'm like,
right.
Yes.
That's right.
He's the ballad.
Yeah.
Because he goes from super melodic to complete abandon.
Yeah.
In 32 bars or 30 bars or whatever it is, and the narrative never changes.
Yes, right.
And this commitment to the idea.
It proves some interesting points.
And that's,
you know what I mean?
That's way different than Ron's.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say Ron is a heady player.
Right.
But
there's a different intention or a different motivation.
Right, absolutely.
So one of the things that he would have me do at lessons is he would write out a blues, or he'd write out the changes to the blues with 12 bars, and then he'd put some notes that are definitely conflicting with the chords in some places, and he would say, hit those notes and convince me that that's the only note that would belong there.
Oh my gosh.
So you had to set it up. You for the 2 measures before, you had to build something that made it feel like that's what had to happen at that thing.
Wow.
And it's challenging to do, and I still do it sometimes.
That's a hell of an exercise.
Yeah. Then he'd do it, but he'd do it. He'd play 5 choruses in a row, and each time when he'd come to it, I'd be like, "Oh man, that's great!" And then the next one, I'd be like, "Oh, another good one."
Was this? Did he develop this exercise, or did he
Yeah,
learn
I
this
think
from someone?
Well, I don't know if it's something that he developed as an exercise to teach, or was something that he was doing for himself. But it definitely relates to what he has told me he does on records and when he performs, which is that he'll look at the chords and just think, where else can I go with what's here that will drive us somewhere different?
Yeah.
And he said, I'm not looking for like the big applause after I play a solo. I'm looking to play something that the band goes, oh, now we got to go over here. He's like, that's a home run to me more so than playing some kind of a great solo.
Okay.
So that philosophy of searching for doing something different, I try to keep that frame of mind and apply that even when I'm here with Khalil. Like if he plays me a hip hop track, I'll give him a pass that's straightforward, but I always ask if I can do a couple and see if I can find a different combination of notes or different roots. Try to do the whole thing on only fifths and see if that works. And in searching for that, I feel like I've come up with some things that are pretty cool that if I didn't decide to do that, wouldn't exist.
Do they typically land?
Let's say like half the time, but it's worth it when
Sure.
not even less than half the time, probably less than half the time. But when I find it, I'm like, yeah, did it? I found something, and I feel like satisfied that I looked and found something.
Yeah.
And if I look and don't find something, I'm satisfied too because at least I looked. You know what I mean?
Of course.
So that comes from Ron. But I think the other thing, Ron is super disciplined about himself and other people, what he expects from other people as musicians and even in other ways. And I definitely needed that. I couldn't have gotten that from records. I definitely needed that. I needed someone at the time that I was studying with him to just be like set a standard and stick to it because I think I had way too sloppy and lazy of an attitude.
Okay.
And
what kind of things were you doing at the time musically?
Just teaching myself stuff. I'd moved out here. I was playing guitar. I ended up touring in this group playing bass. I was in this group called Wozani. We opened for Ozo Motley on tour, and I fell into that just because
I was in a commercial with one of the guys.
Oh, which one?
I forgot.
Will Dog, maybe.
I forgot. He was kind of a bigger guy. It's like weird. I did a Modelo commercial.
Oh wow!
Like 2 years ago.
That's funny.
And one of the dudes, he played.
Yeah, what does he play? And I'll tell you what he.
Oh, I forgot. I forgot what he played. I just remember he was like the manager of our fake band on the commercial.
Oh, that's funny. I wonder who that is. I don't know.
Yeah, I forgot his name.
Okay.
Anyways.
Anyway, it was fun touring with those guys, and I really looked up to the bass player, Will Dog, who I had a funny relationship with because he was really, really rough on me. He knew that I looked up to him, and then he would come to our sound checks and be like, "No, what you're doing doesn't sound right."
Out of love, or just busting balls to kind of be a dick?
Love, but
Okay.
he's a ball buster for sure. But even if he's doing it affectionately, it's like it's rough edged. Yeah, and I would be like, oh god, but there's a good end to the story, which is that so he would come, and I was just teaching myself stuff. I was like I would like try and learn Jocko stuff, right? Whatever things I was learning off of records to try to figure out how to be a good bass player, and then he'd come to the sound checks, and he used to do a thing that won't translate on something that's only audio, but he would kind of point his hand at me like in a straight hand with all 4 fingers pointing at me in rhythm with the song, like play in time, which I thought I was doing. And like I remember specifically there was a night where we were on stage and he was behind the edge of the curtains and I'm playing and I kind of get over to the edge of the stage and I see he's there and he's doing that rhythm thing like and I was like, oh man, leave me alone. And then later the same night I'm on the side of the stage watching him and their show is like they're dancing and jumping around. It's like very like presented, like worked out, choreographed show, and he's moving around, he's dancing, he comes over to the side of the stage, and while they're playing, he looks off at me and does it to me, and I was like, oh, leave me alone. And then I ended up playing in this group called The Rebirth, that's like a sort of an Earth, Wind, and Fire, soul, jazz, soul funk kind of group.
Okay.
And the bass stuff in that was very involved, and I worked really hard on that and played with them.
Anybody
for a long time.
from Earth, Wind, and Fire in it, or was it?
No. I'm just using that as like a stylistic reference. I mean, as much Earth, Wind, and Fire as like Ramp, but the Roy Ayers, or there's like a whole world of like this kind of rare groove soul stuff that's influenced by jazz, and that's what they were coming out of.
Okay.
Or there's another. I mean, there's groups are kind of obscure that they like, but the Whatnots. You'd know these groups because they get sampled. That's mostly how they've stayed alive or stayed in people's kind of consciousness. But the bass stuff was involved, like Earth, Wind, and Fire stuff, and even kind of beyond in terms of like the technical stuff. And so after I played with Marty for like 5 years or something, we played at the Sunset Junction Festival.
Okay.
And we had like a nice nighttime, like 7 o'clock slot, and we're playing. And out in the audience, I see Will Dog, like several people back, like, 100 feet back. And we're playing, and I see he's looking at me, and he's smiling and nodding his head.
Oh, like, yeah.
This is like 10 years after
crazy.
the Wozania. So I'm playing and playing, and then I look, we play a couple more songs, and he's closer. Then we play more. Then he's at the front of the stage. Then we play a few more songs, and then he's now got up, because I'm sure he knows someone there. He's up on the side of the stage next to me, like 5 feet away from me, like, yeah, pointing at me, going like this. And I was like, wow. And I just by virtue of time, I know I'd gotten better since the time he knew me. But then we got off the stage, and I'm back in the little backstage area, and he's like, dude, incredible. And I was so like, wow, okay. Like, I felt like I could, because it was still hanging over me, those years of him being like, you suck.
Right.
He never was like that, but it felt that way.
Right.
So, like, having him come back and be like I was like, circle is complete.
Yeah. Did him making those gestures to like really drive time and like hard time? Did that make you like go back to the shed and just like I gotta?
Well, it made me wonder what I was doing wrong, because
and when you don't know, that's the worst.
No,
when you just feel like you're this nebulous failure.
Yes, and I'm listening back to recordings, and I'm like, what am I missing? What am I missing here? But then, of course, I'd see them right after us on the same stage and be like, well, whatever I'm doing, I'm not doing that. So there's somewhere else I got to go. There's another level I got to get to. I just can't figure out what it is. But yeah, he also used to say, like, I took dance lessons. Take dance lessons. Just to kind of get rhythm in your body. Sure. And I actually did do that.
Really?
There was a Cuban. I used to live in Palms, and there was a Cuban dance place, and my cousin's really into Cuban dancing, so she was like, "Why don't you go there?" I told her that. She's like, "Go to this Cuban dance place."
Where's that?
And I went.
What place?
It was called. What was the name of it? Not Bamboo. I'll remember it. It doesn't exist anymore. It was right on Venice and Overland. And there was a scene there. There was a Cuban dance scene there. Like when I'd go there, and it would be packed, and people that had been taking lessons there for like 8 years.
Now there's like a CVS. Like there's.
It could be a CVS now. I do think it closed down, but that scene of people I know are still around. I'll see them online.
Okay.
But there's a world of like people that just are into Cuban dance,
sure. And
it was cool to go there. I didn't tell anyone I was a musician. I was just there to learn how to dance, and I didn't get to be particularly good at it, but. It couldn't hurt.
Did you get into the music, the Cuban music, when you were getting into Cuban dance?
A little bit.
To understand that relationship?
A little bit, but not nearly. I should still do that. But there was, they knew all. It was like, I was just like, oh, this is a whole other thing.
It's a language, man.
I got there, and they're like, do you know this group in Bubble? And I was like, I never heard of any of these people. And sometimes when we were there and they were playing recorded music, I would hear bass stuff that I'd be like, good Lord, who is it?
Yeah.
But that's like, you could spend, same as jazz. It's like you could spend the rest of your life just digging into that.
I purposely didn't get into Cuban music out of respect for Cuban music.
Yeah.
Because I understand that it's a whole culture.
Yes.
And like I can't.
No, it's
I can whatever.
You might as well give everything else up and just do
like
that if that's what you're gonna do. Yeah, right. Well, it's like the jazz thing. It's like it's hard to have one foot in it at any level, but you have to have a certain level of and then it's when you come across people who just have like kind of done it at the thinnest hobby layer, it's tough to have to deal with them. And it is for people that put a lot of time into it. You're like, oh, I don't want to have to deal with someone who hasn't invested any time in this and just wants to come and hobby out for a couple minutes,
Right. And I didn't want to be that guy. I'd rather like turn the gig down than show up and like.
That's how I felt. I heard it, and like in 2 seconds I was like, this is a whole universe, and I'm already on another track. You know what I mean?
Right.
But the discipline thing with Ron was good, because like the first lesson he wanted me to play a B flat scale with just a click on, and he said, I'm going to imitate your voice, Ron. I apologize if you ever hear this. Mr. Seeff, I want you to play the scale, and I want every note to be the same length, same tone, and the same volume. And in my mind I'm like, got it. And I go doon doon doon, just ever so slightly. The open D is louder. Stop, do it again. I'm like, dun, dun, dun. Now it's too soft. One more time. And that went on for about, 5 minutes or something.
Did you ever just like not play the open string to avoid it? I think that would have been my like, well,
I might have. You know what? Had I done that and it worked, he would have been like, check, go on to E flat. But no, I just hammered away at doing it in half position until after he'd stopped me like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. and I was starting to get sort of angry internally and be like, "Ugh,
Right.
get off my back." But eventually, my mind just went to like, I better put every ounce of concentration I have into doing this right, or this guy's never gonna let me go on to do anything else.
Sure.
And then like I sort of like mustered all my mental energy and like played it right once. And then he was.
Do you think that's what he was looking for more than anything?
Yes, he wanted me to focus to the degree
that
and get
level of
And then he said,
on every note.
That's it. That's what he said. After I did it, he said, "Now, Mr. Seeff, you need that type of focus every time you play this instrument. Every time. So keep that as the bar and don't go below it from now on." And I was like, oh my God. So every lesson had moments like that where I'd just be like, oh boy. And it's great. It's like I'm not a coffee drinker, but it's like a double thing of coffee where you're just like you're energized by this like steroid injection.
Right.
So usually I leave those lessons like super pumped up.
Yeah.
Because every person would respond to that differently, and some people might feel beaten down. And if I had studied with him when I was like 18, 19, I know my personality enough to know that would have crushed me rather than inspired me.
Sure.
But I came to it late when I was confident enough to take that type of criticism. And also, I had some sense after like the Will Dog experiences and other things to know that I needed more. I wasn't where I could be, and I needed some kind of help to get better.
Right.
And this guy, this incredible recorded like legendary guy, is somehow willing to help me. So just shut up and take what he has to say, and don't be offended by it.
Yeah.
And he's not. His delivery can be rough, but it's not really intended to be rough. It's just intended to be direct. And I figured it out for whatever reason. So he would say stuff that would be very intense, but inside I would just be like, okay, I know his personality. It's fine.
I've never met him in person, but it was, maybe you were there, a couple years ago. He did a Q&A at the Colburn School.
I didn't see it.
Okay. I was playing downtown, and the piano player on the gig's like, "Hey, I don't know what you're up to afterwards, but Ron's doing this like open Q&A." I'm like, yeah, dude, of course I'm in.
Did he play or just talk?
He played a little bit.
Okay. Solo bass or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just like played a tune.
Did he play You Are My Sunshine by any chance?
I don't think so.
All right. That's something he's been doing for the last few years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Huh.
You Are My Sunshine, My
I
Own
know the
Sunshine.
tune.
Yeah.
I can't remember what.
He does it, and then he does all the like double stop stuff. That
and
he
he
does.
like comps for himself.
Yeah, and does it's cool.
I've heard him do Willow Weep for me.
Yeah, he does that a lot.
And I was really, like I'm showing up expecting. Like that's just kind of the nature in me, is like hear all these gems of wisdom. And I don't know if it was a bunch of parents whose children were going to but it was just weren't questions I would ask. Like I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus for their question, but
you mean basic kind of questions?
Yeah. Questions along the line of like, should my kids be pursuing music?
Oh.
And like.
But see, I'll tell you something interesting. I know him enough to know that would someone else might be like, I'm this famous bro, don't ask me that. He's down to like, I know, I would imagine, you can tell me if this is accurate. He's cool. He'd be cool to be like, yeah. Like he's said stuff to me before where he was like, I think of myself as a teacher who still gigs, and like he doesn't have some like I'm beyond that because of my.
No, he never had that demeanor. Yeah. He definitely put as much thought into that question.
Yes.
As he did into every other one.
Yes.
And the answer was still like, I can't tell you how to parent.
Yeah.
But he had gone through all the options in his mind.
Yeah. Also, I mean, he was just once upon a time a guy who was studying bass, and he's still, he remembers that, and will still talk about like, if you're gonna do this, one time he said, I have to go across town in this bus into Detroit snow to study with my classical teacher, and I know what's involved in having to make that type of commitment. So he doesn't have like I'm beyond all that.
Sure. No, I don't think so. I'm sure you read his book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I love the book.
Yeah, I love the book.
I didn't know he was a classical guy first until I read the book, and that's a really sad story.
It's an awful story, and it's still like very much like on the surface of how he feels about things that like hurt him really badly, and it still hurts him now.
He did like this kind of live, like Facebook Live thing. Yeah. Did you see this a few months ago? People chime in with questions and stuff, and he does them regularly.
Oh, wow.
And I think he brought it up even then.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but it's something I've heard since reading the book, which was like right when it came out.
Right.
I've heard multiple times from him.
Right. I mean, well, it's like everybody responded. You know, people that had to go through that kind of thing. Some people put it out of their mind. Some people never could get past it. Ron got past it, but it still hurts him. But it's like, you know, these are the things that we would never have to deal with. You know, to like work really hard and then have someone be like, you will never get this opportunity for this absurd reason. Yeah. And have your heart broken. You know. Right. And so.
For the listeners that may or may not know the story, Ron wasn't allowed to be in the orchestra because he was African American.
That's right. Yeah. And he'd been going, I think if I remember the story correctly, he'd been, which I don't know the track you take when you do that kind of stuff, but my understanding is that after you graduate, you go around and do auditions at different places, and people will relocate if they get a job at the Cincinnati one or whatever. So he was doing that, which is I think what a lot of people did. Sure. Same of his white counterparts would. Right. And at the third or fourth one, someone pulled him aside and said, "Look, we know you've been going around doing this, but we want to just save you the time. You're never going to get it at any of these." You know, just imagine that. You know, like imagine if that was you. Imagine if your parent that was your son. I mean, you'd be devastated by that. So, but it's just interesting seeing all these other older African American jazz musicians I know, and every one of them had something like that. Sure. And they've all handled it differently. Some of them it like really, really hurt them. Some of them it probably, you know, led to other self-destructive things because it was painful. Other ones just found some way to just be like, cool, that happened. I'm going to just move on and somehow put that in the past. Yeah, I don't like that some of the people that we know, it's like part of their success that we might not think about is that they were able to bounce back from those types of things happening several times a month and just be like, cool, moving on. Sure. You know? Right. Which is like, that takes a certain kind of tenacity. Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know? I played, I used to play a lot more with this guitar player in town who worked with Ray Charles for the last 5 years of Ray's life. Oh, wow. What's his name? The guitar player? Yeah. Brad. Okay. Rabuchin. Okay. And so we were doing this brunch gig in Santa Barbara a couple times a month, and we'd carpool out there. And I had known him for a while already, but I hadn't talked to him about, like, the Ray years. But I'm a huge Ray Charles fan. Okay. And so I remember us talking about it one time, and he's like, man, Ray, like the old days, would always ask for, even still, towards the end of his life, half up front, half right before you go on stage. I'd heard that. There's this thing that was ingrained in Ray. Yeah. And well, if you get screwed 500 times. Yeah, and have, like, someone you know you can trust count it and all that. Right. I have no. Yeah, that's an old school. I can't even begin to wrap my mind around that kind of, you know, to me, being a musician's already hard enough. Yeah. You know, right. Let alone that era. Yeah. Under that circumstance. Yeah. You know, like, yeah, it's like, do what you do, but we're also going to throw tomatoes at you. You know what I mean? Kick you in the neck while you're trying to play. You know what I mean? It's terrible. You know, Jim, this is unrelated to this, but just about anyone having to do anything creative that, like, you know, you were talking about something about this earlier about just like you were talking about the Jamerson thing, everything that went into his success that happened before we even know him as Jamerson. I think it was a Jim Carrey on the Actors Studio, and someone was like, "What advice can you give me about my acting?" You know, blah 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 blah. He said, "I could give you acting advice, but he said what I would say is go try to do a play and do it while people are throwing stuff at you and they're like moving the scenery around and someone's yelling in your ear, because he's like, your talent is a given. You have to have that to do this. But then can you do it under just one terrible circumstance after another where things aren't set up for you to win?" Yeah. It's like, that's going to be the test, is can you endure all the crazy stuff and still act? Sure. You know what I mean? And it's the same for what we're doing. Like any musical thing, it's like, you know, I just did something where I had to go play with someone and play acoustic guitar, and, you know, I knew it even before I went in. It was like, the sound was crazy and I couldn't hear myself, and then it was a live gig. Yeah, it was a live gig. Okay. And I was just like, you know, you go in, and I think about those things when I do that. I'm like, well, I gotta just somehow deliver even under these circumstances, because the people in the audience are going to know all these things that are happening to me. Sure. So that's the piece of it that someone who's just enjoying music doesn't know about, everything that is endured to make it. You know what I mean? And then even more so if you're black and people are just treating you like garbage for no reason. Oh, right. You know, that's the worst. Yeah. I mean, at that time with the acoustic guitar that just happened, did you have Ron Carter in the back of your? Oh, your I always have him in the back of my mind. Yeah. Always. That's when you say what else did I not get from a record? is just, and he would say that to me. He'd say, I'm not going to physically be there when you're practicing, Mr. Seeff, so I just want you to picture my voice in your ear. That worked. That has worked. I hear him. Like, sometimes when I do something, I do it, I'm like, okay, I got it. And then I hear Mr. Seeff, I'm like, okay, all right, Ron.
Yeah.
Let me do it one more time.
Right.
That's what he wants, though. You know, and my wife is a classical musician, and she has a very similar approach to him, and she will say stuff to me that I'm like, God, you sound like Ron. And then they've met, and they like totally, he's like, this is good. She's going to keep you on the straight and narrow. You know what I mean? Like, he loves, because also getting back to the classical thing, I do think some of what I'm describing that he does comes from a classical training.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's good. That's good. You know, and then when I think about, he was in this group with Miles, and Miles, I think, went to Juilliard briefly. Wayne, I don't think, played in any classical thing. Tony Williams was a teenager. Herbie had some classical background when he was little, but there was a guy in there who had much more of this kind of like,
right.
And I think that probably played a function in the dynamic of that band, the chemistry of that band.
Yeah.
You know, that there was a guy who was like, it's got to be right, it's got to be this way, and
I loved in the book, he would talk about like him, Ron, Herbie, and Tony after the gig, sitting around and talking about like, all right, what can we do better tomorrow night?
Right.
Can you imagine the idea of that?
I know.
Like,
that's so awesome.
If people in LA would like play a gig and then like go to the diner and talk about the gig and how they can play better the next.
Of course.
That's unheard of.
I mean, in a case where you're touring every night, it makes sense because you know you're going to be with the same people.
Yeah, and you're playing probably the same rep.
And you're developing something that could last for a long time. But I hear what you're saying. Well, that is another thing I've noticed with him. I've seen it with Herbie and Wayne to a degree. Wayne's a little more mysterious in his communication, but they are very driven. They're very, very, very driven, and they don't broadcast that they're driven. They just are driven. Like, they're not going to be like, I'm going to go home and practice, but it's like they don't let it go until they've pushed it as far as they can possibly go.
Sure.
And that's like a character quality that is, in some way, got to be responsible for their success.
Of course.
And they expect it out of others. I mean, Ron tells you that he expects it out of you. Herbie, I don't know if he tells you that, but if you don't do it, he's just kind of like, well, you're not serious.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it's like, that, and they got a chance to be.
Does Herbie do that? Does Herbie take on private students like Ron did?
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't.
So. But he does come and teach at the Institute.
Yeah.
And he's very positive about the stuff that he hears the students doing. But I just know that he's got those kind of high standards. He's not as vocal about it as Ron is. But those guys got to be in a situation where 5 of them were together and all had basically the same philosophy and the same standard. And like that in a way I think is like the luck. Well, not luck. I guess they were picked by someone. So it was Miles' great vision and thinking to like put those 4 people together with him. But like that's great. Like you get to be with any one of those guys could have been like, well, in the scene I'm in, I'm the most driven. And now all of a sudden you get to be where you're like neck and neck with other people and like let's all just keep pushing.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Moving up.
Yeah, and that I'm sure that's. I mean, again, this is all my silly theory, but based at least on knowing some of these guys to some degree. That's got to be part of the success of what that group was. They were all like, let's get in there and like go as far as we can go,
Yeah, and Tony being 18,
right? He's
not only like infamously have an ego, but he's still 18,
right?
Like there's still like 18-year-old in there,
right,
and he's still looking up to like the older guys and wanting to be able to hang,
right, totally.
Even though he's Tony Williams,
right,
but he's 18,
right,
like that. There has to be a duality there within him.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't read that much about him.
Yeah, he's the one that I know the least about, actually.
Yeah.
But I do always think about that when I'm listening to that band, and I remind myself, I'm like, wow, this guy was a teenager.
It's insane.
Crazy.
Yeah. I heard that there's some like young dude out with Stanley Clarke right now that's
like that.
Crushing it, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, nowadays we can go on YouTube and see all these like really, really young people that play like unbelievably. And I wonder if some of it is that you can learn. I mean, I've learned a lot of musical things off of YouTube. Mm-hmm. Like there are a lot of guitar. So because I've spent a long time playing guitar and I still do it here at the studio, I used to learn a lot of random stuff, Pink Floyd songs and Yes songs and Steely Dan as much as I possibly could. But that was complicated when I was a teenager. And I finally last year learned the solo from Kid Charlemagne.
Oh, dope.
The Larry Carlton solo,
which
I could not learn when I was a teenager. I could learn the beginning, and then I'd be like, this part, don't know that. I'd like BS my way through.
I learned enough.
Yeah, I'd be like, don't know this part. You know what I mean?
Right.
And there was still something I couldn't get. He does this bend, which I now found out from YouTube, is that he bends and then taps higher up and then unbends.
Oh.
And I just never would have figured that out in a million years. I was trying all these other ways, and finally I was like, all right, let me go to YouTube. And of course, there's 10 people on there doing it on YouTube. And not only that, but explaining in detail, you're going to take a C and bend it up to a D and then touch it at the A, and
Okay.
And so I wonder if some of these like super young players coming up, if they're benefiting from the fact that you can, there's great ways to learn now that didn't used to exist.
Right.
Anything.
Yeah.
Because I'm teaching myself Ableton right now.
Okay.
I'm doing that from YouTube.
Yeah.
I mean, Khalil's helping me too, but when he's not here, I can just go on YouTube for a half hour and it'll be like, how to do this, how to do that,
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have killed for that when I was in college.
I've done some of that. I get like too antsy. And I'm like, get tired of somebody selling something or clicking on their thing.
Sometimes it's that.
Fast forward. All right, I went too far back up.
Sometimes it's that, but you can't. Or like I was teaching myself like some gospel guitar stuff that I don't know how to do any of that stuff, and I got a bunch of great voicings from a guy named. Anyway, I got some great voicings from a guy with an interesting name. I don't want to say his name because it'll sound like I'm making fun of him, and I will be making fun of him.
Yeah. Okay.
But he is a great guitar player. He kind of has a funny name though. But yeah.
So is that do you spend a lot of time still working on guitar for studio stuff or
for studio stuff?
For personal?
Yeah, like both. I just do it like I learned a Wes Montgomery transcription in December also.
Nice.
I've grown accustomed to her face.
Okay.
Again, because I started it in college.
Yeah.
And went da 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 da. Can't figure that one out. Can't figure that one. Got that one. So and it's like that hangs with me. I'm like, I should go back and finally.
Right.
So
you
I
just want to resolve.
Yeah, it just makes I'll think about it and feel bad about myself. So I'm like, let me just actually learn. So I learned it all the way through, and again from YouTube.
Yeah.
Now I could do 75% of it on my own.
Okay.
But there were a couple voicings in there that I'm like, I just don't know that one. Someone else does.
Right.
And someone, thank the Lord, took the time to put this up with tabs on YouTube, so the tabs go by.
Thing,
yeah, and I was like, great. So I just looked, and I was like, there it is. That's easy.
Okay.
But I did that. But also Khalil was just encouraging me to learn some of that more kind of gospel guitar style, because all the guitar stuff I know comes from rock, basically.
Yeah.
Some funk stuff. Yeah, rock and funk and Bob Marley and a little bit of Fela. And like David Gilmour from Pink Floyd I know all the David Gilmour solos. I learned that when I was a teenager. You can do that when you're a teenager because it's just pentatonic, basically. But he was like, learn these voicings for the, and man, you can, if you want to do it, it's all over the place on YouTube.
Yeah.
And if you know how to play guitar, it's just knowing some of the tendencies, basically, some of the conventions of that style.
Right.
And there's some things. There's some like, these trills you can do, or if you play a minor voicing and then you go up to this, you slide up to another voicing, and once you see a few of them, you're like, that's that sound. Like Joel Whitley you were bringing up.
Yeah.
Joel knows those things really well
Joel's
on guitar.
great.
In fact, I wanted to get together with him and ask him to show me some of the fancy ones.
But
But
he's such a sweetheart.
he's a great dude. Yeah, I should just go ahead and do that.
Have you heard him play bass?
Yeah, I've heard him. Yes, he's great. He's an awesome musician.
So I don't know if we ran into each other there at all, but me and Iyaji started that jam session at the Federal.
Yes, I
years
went
ago.
once.
Okay.
I went once. Although every week I'd be like, I should go to that, and then I wouldn't.
Yeah. And I remember being
Does it still exist? Is that
No,
jam?
the club pulled the plug on it.
How many years did it go for?
6.
Oh wow, that's a long run for a jam
It was
session.
hanging on there at the end barely for the last, but yeah, it was.
And it was it was one of the big ones in
It was
the
the
city.
scene for a minute.
Yeah.
And I remember I was in the back doing something, and I walked out in this little hallway between the stage and the wall, and I can't see the stage. And I see Iyaji like right in front of me. I'm like, dude, and I'm playing air bass. Like, who is that? And he's like, Joel. But Joel was playing guitar in the house band. And I'm like, Whitley? He's like, yeah. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah.
Like,
He's a great musician.
it sounds like he only played bass.
Yeah, that's right.
And like I've subbed him gigs before, and the drummer will be like, dude, I don't know who this guy is, but damn.
Yeah, he's
like,
great.
Yeah.
He's a serious musician.
Brilliant musician.
Yeah, I think the last time I saw him was this random thing at the House of Blues before it closed down. It was like an educational gospel thing, and he was playing guitar, and I was just like this stuff that I've been learning off YouTube, but more actually. That's what I keep thinking when I watch the YouTube stuff. I'm like, this isn't everything I saw Joel do, so there's still more.
Right.
But I saw he did this stuff where he was using the volume pedal and like sliding up on all these voicings, and I was just like, woof.
Okay.
That's the real deal. Again, like you're talking about the Cuban thing, I'm dipping my foot in it because I can use it in other contexts.
Yeah.
I'll never get all the way there, but I want to get as far as I can with the time that I have to do it.
Sure.
I saw it. There's a jam session in New York. I wonder if it still goes on at the place called the Village Gate, I think. that's a gospel vocal jam session.
Really?
So it's for vocalists and all these. It's like all the background singers from this person and that, Brian McKnight and
Is it like a
this
road
artist.
musician?
Yes,
hang?
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't know any of the background singers, but same as with us, it's like they're in their world, they know each other, they're subbing each other gigs, all that kind of stuff. But the band is all these heavyweight New York R&B players, and it's
that's got to be ridiculous.
And then the other thing happens is that the singers get up to sing, and the audience joins in harmony.
Yeah.
So if you're sitting in the audience, it's like you're sitting in this gospel choir all of a sudden. I don't even know half the material they were playing, but the girl would get up to sing, and they'd start, and all around me, I hear all the different voices.
Everybody's just in.
And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
But the bass playing, guitar playing, I was like in awe of what I was seeing. All this great, like, subtle stuff and the sound, and So I learned stuff off YouTube when I need to, and Khalil was the one that was really like, get this stuff together. And what I do also is that one of the things I do at the studio when we don't have something we're working on is I just create a lot of material for when it's needed.
Okay.
So like if I know we'll have some writing sessions coming up, and I want to walk into these things prepared, and I know sometime will come up where someone's going to want to do some straight R&B type stuff of today.
And by prepared, you mean just have some ideas?
Have some ideas, so I'm not walking in cold. Yeah. So I'll make 20. 8-bar loops, or maybe I'll even do a whole song, make it a whole song where there's a bridge and a chorus or whatever that changes slightly in the style of whatever the guitar thing I'm learning. So if I've just learned a bunch of these things, I'll be like, cool, I know these 5 voicings. Let me try and get like 20 songs out of it.
Okay.
And just give myself that goal. And for the next 3 days, get these things and vary the sound a little bit from track to track.
Sure.
Do one with tons of reverb, one really dry. And in doing that and listening back, then I figure out I'll listen back and be like, cool, that doesn't sound so good. I'm like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like I'm figuring out what's going to work.
The self-editing thing.
Exactly. And then then in writing sessions, sometimes Khalil will be like, grab some of the stuff you did, and we'll just play it down for a singer. They'll be like, no, I like that one, the third one. Let's do that.
Cool.
Or if not, I kind of have them somewhat memorized to a degree.
Yeah.
So if he's like, play something, I can be like, this is one of the ones. Yeah. Maybe I don't remember exactly, but it's like I'm putting that raw material in the library.
Right.
In the mental library for when it's needed later.
Yeah.
And doing that guitar stuff has really been valuable.
Okay.
Super valuable, because they use voicings that they're not really even jazz voicings, but they're definitely, you wouldn't find them in rock, because you don't even have a diminished chord in most rock.
Yeah.
But they have these certain voicings they like that you hear them and you're like, that's that sound that's in R&B.
Okay.
Specific to that genre.
So being a multi-instrumentalist, you spend most of your multi-instrumentalist, the Hancock Institute, you produce your own stuff as well as write.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're spinning a lot of plates.
And DJ, yeah.
Right. Oh, you DJ.
Well, I mean, not DJ, but radio host for the KJazz thing. Yeah.
How's that going? Which honestly, that made me like. I want to talk about the show in a second. I know you have to split.
What time is it?
Oh, damn.
Is it 3 past 3?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can keep going. I'm trying to get a bunch of stuff done today. Oh my God, it's 3:40.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go another 10 minutes or so.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry about that.
No, it's cool.
The radio host thing was like, oh shit, he's a DJ. Now I got to go interview a guy who's used to doing this. I'm not used to doing this at all.
But I wasn't used to doing it when I started. I only started in June of last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
How's it go? Did you pitch them the idea for the show?
No, they pitched me.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, why?
Why did they pitch me?
Yeah, that sounds like an asshole question, but
because
how'd they hear of you, or like? What?
I was at a meeting with the station manager talking about what it was the Monk Institute at the time, and it somewhere in the course of the conversation, it came up that I did all this work in hip hop, and she came up after and she said, you should do a show on hip hop and jazz.
Yeah.
And at the time I was like, I do not have time to do that. But she was pretty persistent about it and asked me several times, and even came by my office one time and just knocked on the door and was like, we're ready for you if you want to do it. And it's,
So you already had an office down there at KJazz?
No. My office at the Institute.
Okay.
She came to UCLA. She was there for something else and just came by and was like, when are you ready to do the show? It's something that I did. I had a radio show when I was in college, like a really terrible college radio show. But so I had a little bit of experience, but I have the recordings from that, and they're hilariously terrible. But it's something I would have wanted to do, and if she'd asked me that 10 years ago, I would have been like, yes, and like put all my energy into it. But then she's asking me at a time where I just gotten married. The Institute is like getting busier and busier and busier. The work down here is getting busier, and I was like, I don't have time to do this. But then she was so serious about wanting me to do it. I was like, well, let me at least consider it and come up with what I think I'd want to do, And
they were just giving you the time slot. Like you got to pick the format. Like the topic.
She just wanted it to be hip hop and jazz. Beyond that, it could be whatever I wanted. So I thought, well, let me come up with what I like to do, and if she's into it, then we can do it. If it's something I don't want to do, I'm not asking to do it anyway, so I don't have to do.
Right.
I don't have to do it. But she's been completely into any ideas I have, and not that my ideas are that crazy, but you know. She hasn't said, oh, it has to be this or it has to be that. She's liked everything I've suggested. And some stuff I've tried didn't work. I just changed it because it's just me. It's like a one-man thing. I do it here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't go there. I just record it and send it in. But yeah, it's gone.
And what do you do? You just talk about?
No, I play. So the first hour I play hip-hop that's sampled from jazz back-to-back with the jazz.
Okay.
So it'll be like a Tribe song and then follow it with the Freddie Hubbard song that's the sample.
Yeah.
And on and on and on. And there's a world of that. You know, there's like hours and hours of music like that. Although I don't know all of it, but I've got a friend who's a hip-hop producer who knows more of it, and I kind of hired him to help dig for stuff. And so I do that the first hour, and then the second hour I have guests.
Okay.
So the guests have been Christian McBride, Bob Hurst, Gretchen Parlato, Walter Smith, Gerald Clayton, Khalil, Sam, hip-hop guys you may or may not be familiar with, Shafiq Hussein, Ant-Man Wonder, House Shoes, was a collaborator with Jay Dilla, and has all of Jay Dilla's material that hasn't been released, and probably someone else, Kiefer, piano player, it's like a jazz hip-hop. And so the first half I play music, second half I interview them, and they pick the music during their segment. And yeah, it's gone well. I mean, I don't have a sense of how many people are listening to it, but I have an Instagram site set up for it, and I do have people say, "Listen, this week I loved it. This is my favorite thing." You know,
what is it? Throw the handles.
Oh yes, Excursions Radio on
Excursions
Instagram.
Radio.
Yeah,
okay.
I've got 500 followers.
And that's only in LA, or is it an internet thing?
It's only in LA, but you can listen on the KJazz website in the archive. Each show stays up on the archive for 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have links to it all.
Okay.
On
Cool.
this thing.
Right on.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's gone well. I mean, I'm still figuring it out as I go.
Sure.
The hardest thing is finding the time to do it.
Yeah.
And finding the time to find the people and interview them. Like, you know, I can get someone, but then I got to take, same as what you're doing.
Right.
I got to go over there. I got to then, same as what you're going to be doing, I got to edit it, but then I got to edit the other half of the show and drop all the music in and then go through. And, you know, it's when I first started, it was taking me about 10 hours per show.
Okay.
Now, with the help of my friend, because the digging was another piece.
Right.
I got through, I was at the end of everything I knew that was hip hop and jazz by the fourth show. I was like, I'm done. I'm like, this. I'm gonna have to close up shop.
Yeah.
But then I told my friend that, and he's like, "Oh, what about this artist?" I'm like, "I've never even heard of them."
Okay.
He knows all this stuff. So
he's producing the show with you.
He's co-producing with me.
Great.
Yeah, yeah. He sends me a Dropbox link with all the pairings.
Killing.
It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. And I open it up, and it says like De La Soul, Milt Jackson, and then I open up the next one, and it says Pete Rock and CL Smooth, Freddie Hubbard, and I just drop them in, do the announcing. I don't know half of it myself.
Right.
So I'm learning about it too.
That's fun.
I know a lot of it, but I don't now that I'm doing it, I know how much I don't know.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, I started doing blogs for the website.
Okay.
And some of them are just ideas. They're like, what's this?
Yeah.
Like the first recording with an electric bass.
What is it? Wait, hold on. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is it Montgomery? It is, right?
Yeah, Quincy produced it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And what is
Art
it?
Farmer record.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And it's a Fender, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a P. And I never knew that.
Okay. And what is it, 50 something?
Oh, now you're having me remember my own thing. Yeah.
Okay.
58 seems to be rattling around in my head, but I have no idea without
That's awesome.
re-looking it back up.
I'd heard that he was the first.
Yeah.
I heard that he was just the first one to play it. So I figured he might be the first one to,
But then I went all the way back. All right, so electric bass started with Fender. No. This cat in the 30s in Seattle.
Oh.
The dude that started Audiovox.
Oh.
As the first.
And does it look like the electric
No,
bass? It doesn't.
No, I have a pic. I'll send you the article if you're interested to read it.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
a picture of the first one. It's now in the Smithsonian.
Does it look like an upright?
No, it's short scale. It looks like a
Oh.
little Bronco bass.
Oh.
Like a Bronco bass and like a Dan Electro. It's really an odd look.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But yeah, so I'm learning a lot about doing this.
But that's what
it keeps
that's
it fun.
Exactly. That's what's kind of cool about it. Like I've asked each of the guests to talk about the hip hop, jazz, whatever connection.
Yeah.
And they've all said stuff that I never would have thought of.
Sure.
You know, like Walter was like, "Oh yeah, my interest in hip hop came before jazz, and then when I started studying jazz, I got more particular about what I listened to because I got less tolerant of people whose time feel that I didn't like. So he said
hip-hop.
In hip-hop.
Yeah.
He said some MCs were right on the beat, and I just couldn't take it anymore. Once I started studying jazz, I wanted to hear guys that had a more interesting... So he's like, so Snoop Dogg for a long time, because he's so behind. He was like, that's got to be my thing. I never would have thought of that. Gerald Clayton was like, oh, they're both blues-based music. They both have their roots in the blues of sharing a pained experience and reusing old material. He's like, blues is the same thing, and they just keep reusing it in different ways.
Sure.
And that's like a common thing of both of them that is, you take out of the equation harmony and all that other thing, but it's got those things in common.
If you take out the academia of jazz,
Yeah.
I really fundamentally believe
Yeah.
it is the exact same.
Yes, right. That was his point.
It's
And
like
then-
it's a street music.
Right.
It came up
Yeah.
from a culture
Right.
of innovation
Right.
and oppression.
Right.
And it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, the institutionalization, if that's a word,
Yes, it is.
of jazz
Yeah.
made jazz suck a little bit.
That's
You know what I mean? Like
It's true.
No
Well,
one
yeah,
plays.
all the people we love didn't go through that. So
No.
so
And
then,
there's a heart and there's a soul in
Yeah,
that
right.
music that I don't find in a lot of modern recordings.
yeah, that's true. That's true. And there are a lot of interesting. That's a whole other conversation. The factors that have led to that. But that, and then Kiefer made the interesting point of, he said jazz musicians transcribe and learn pieces of music that people played before them, and hip hop musicians sample and take pieces of music.
Yeah. It's all a language.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So
no different than people jacking Parker licks.
Right, exactly. So each show, somebody says something that I'm like, that's great, that's good.
Yeah.
It's like an insight that I didn't have.
Yeah, I remember listening to Eminem's record one time with Mahesh Balasuria.
Yeah.
And Mahesh is a brilliant piano player for those that don't know him, and he's really great with polyrhythms.
Yeah.
And he's like, man, listen to Eminem's like grouping of fives right here.
Ah.
And I'm like, oh, damn, okay.
That's another.
Like that's
hadn't even
some next
thought about
level. I
that,
didn't
yeah.
even think about it.
Do you remember specifically what that was?
It was an Eminem single about 2 years ago.
Man,
I
that's
don't know.
that's another road to go down that I hadn't even thought about. The groupings of because I've thought a little bit about. That's a whole other thing, yeah. How MCs put their stuff together.
I can text him and find out.
Somebody's probably done analyses of those.
Yeah.
I'd just be curious to
Well, and I'm curious, like, where I understand how the jazz musician, like, would want to do a grouping of five. Either whatever.
How does a hip hop musician?
Yeah,
arrive at
where
that?
do they
I don't
get
know. Probably when we're talking about the institutionalization, probably the same thing as the jazz musician, which is like, I got to do something different. What is it? And they might not even know what it is, but it's like, that sounds different.
Yeah, and it was just that simple.
And it's just But that's which is cool because hip hop hasn't been institutionalized yet, but it may be in the future.
I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of schools doing like pop music and a lot of
course.
production classes.
I'm saying it's already started.
And I don't.
But then what'll happen is one of the effects of institutionalizing these music forms is the homogenizing, because everybody goes through and learns the same thing, so then everybody sounds the same. Yeah. And the other thing about it is that they come to it by being taught it before they've had a chance to
live it.
Yes, right.
Yeah. And get your ass kicked on gigs
or whatever, or just drive in your car with your mom and have it on the radio and be like, I love this song. It's like you haven't even had a chance to just have your own relationship before somebody started being like, listen to this, do this, follow this thing, paint these numbers in it,
Yeah.
That's a totally, if you hear it and you get drawn to it and you're like, I got to somehow be a part of it. That's very different than a teacher being like, follow these steps.
Right.
That's
when
already.
you're hooked and like, what is that I need to do that is much different than like, I'll paint by these numbers to please you and get a grade.
That's it. And that playing out of the obligation to check the boxes, it has not had a good effect on jazz, because you hear some jazz and you can tell that it's made with that intention. Like, let me make sure I do this, and let me make sure I do that. And and that's like, has any good art ever been made with that as a motivation? I don't think so.
That's a deep question.
That's like that's not, you shop that way.
Right.
You might clean your apartment that way, but you don't want to make art that way.
I remember asking a musician one time, I forgot where the musician was in the process of coming out with the record, or the record just came out. And I asked the musician, like, what's the relevance of your music? Like, what's social or political, or like, where's your music coming from, and what's the relevance of it for right now? And the musician was like, I don't think about that shit. And I just started laughing. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Like, what? then why?
Right.
You know, and I'm not whatever. That's my thing.
Yeah, sure.
Is like, why?
Yeah, right.
You know.
Well, yeah. I mean, it can definitely, jazz can be pretty detached at this point because of the fact that it's gotten into the craft part of it. The craft part of it and the skill part of it is so underscored and does require so much time and effort that it's like that just becomes what kind of magnetizes people more than how it relates to anything outside of itself, you know?
Yeah.
Like how is just a person walking down the street going to be attracted to it if they don't know technically what's going on and that's all you're thinking about?
Right.
You know?
And then what's the point if there's...
Yeah, if it's not going to attract a common person and make them have an experience, then you are stuck playing for your friends.
Right. And then, you know, are they there just because of they want to be nice friends?
Exactly.
Or is this music actually making them feel something or think about themselves or the world around them in any...
Well, these are the conundrums of modern jazz.
Yeah. On that note,
that could be a whole other conversation. Yeah. All right, cool.
All right, thanks for doing this, man.
Thank you, man.
All right, folks, that was Dan Seeff. I love the impersonation of Ron Carter. I think it was pretty spot on. And, the idea of just putting a non-chord tone in there way in advance and eventually setting up your walking line to make that note work. That's an interesting exercise and that I've started to do in my own practice time. Just take a tune and go in and just write some notes in there that aren't part of the chord and see how I can get in and out, sound the chord, get that note in there, and understand the relationship of that note to the chord I'm playing in. So that I make sure I'm aware of whatever alteration is happening. It's kind of a heady exercise, but it gets you to think in this really long form, long phrase idea of your bass line construction, so you're not just getting through necessarily a 4-bar phrase, or even walking the change that you're in, but you're really thinking ahead in a long form kind of way, and that's been really fun to investigate for me in my own practice time, and hopefully you guys can get the free lesson from Ron Carter there, and take that into your own practice time. All right, everybody. That's Dan's story. I'm sticking to it. And catch you on the next one. 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 Catch you on the next one.